Okay, first grade rereaders, we are going to reread Fancy Nancy to see if we can learn more about the character, especially by paying attention to Nancy's relationships with other people in the story. Because we already know that characters are the most important part of a story, but it's not just the main character, it's also about the relationships with other characters, which matter too. Okay, let's get started. Fancy Nancy, written by Jane O'Connor. And remember, anytime we notice something new about Nancy's character today, we're going to hold up a finger and put it on our knee. And I'm going to walk you through a couple. I love being fancy. My favorite color is fuchsia. That's a fancy way of saying purple. I like to write my name with a pen that has a plume. That's a fancy way of saying feather. And I can't wait to learn French because everything in French sounds fancy. Nobody in my family is fancy at all. They never even ask for sprinkles. There's a lot they don't understand. Lace-trimmed socks do help me to play soccer better. Sandwiches definitely taste better when you stick in frilly toothpicks. A princess is supposed to keep her tiara on. What's a fancy girl to do? I ask my doll Maribel. Her full name is Maribel Lavinia Chandelier. Then I get an idea that is stupendous. That's a fancy word for great. Maybe I can teach my family how to be fancy. I make an ad and stick it to the fridge. The ad says, "Learn to be fancy with lessons from Nancy." I'm holding up a finger here. Soon there is a knock on my door. My family saw the ad. They want to get started right away. I'm holding up a finger and putting it on my knee because I'm learning something new about Nancy here. I'm learning that Nancy is helpful. When she noticed that her family members didn't really quite understand what it means to be fancy and why they might enjoy being fancy with her, she decided to plan a little teaching opportunity for them. And she put that ad on her fridge and said, "Hey, come listen to me and I will teach you how to be fancy." So I'm noticing that Nancy is helpful, right? She wants to help others understand. The trouble is, my family doesn't own any fancy clothes. That's okay. I go find, what is that fancy word? Oh yes, some accessories. Ooh la la, my family is posh. That's a fancy word for fancy. My mom twirls in front of the mirror. Why don't we go somewhere fancy tonight? How about dinner at the King's Crown, Dad suggests. Wow, my parents are acting fancier already. In this picture, I'm noticing that Nancy is sort of happy, right? This is something new that I'm noticing from the picture based on how she's interacting with her parents. She's a really happy little girl. She's jumping up in the air at the thought that her family is going to act fancy with her and go out to dinner to do so. May I escort you lovely ladies outside? The limousine is waiting. My dad is our chauffeur. That's a fancy word for driver. When we arrive at the King's Crown, everyone looks up. They probably think we are movie stars. I am so proud of my whole family. They eat with their pinkies up and call each other darling. I have my finger up, I'm putting it on my knee, first graders. I'm noticing that Nancy is kind of silly, and I'm noticing that because of the relationship she has with her family, right? They're all dressed up in a diner together. Nobody else around them is dressed up like that. They're all eating with their pinkies up, right? And enjoying a little fancy dinner. So I'm noticing that Nancy is silly, And I'm noticing that because of the relationship with her family. For dessert, let's have parfaits, my mom says. That's French for ice cream sundaes. Amazing, my mother knows French. When our parfaits are ready, I curtsy and say, merci. I carry the tray like a fancy waiter. Oops, I trip. I slip. The tray does a double flip. I don't feel fancy anymore. I want to go home. After I get all cleaned up, I put on my dressing gown. Those are fancy words for a bathrobe. I feel much better. I'm ready for a parfait. I tell my parents, thank you for being fancy tonight. Nancy's polite based on how she speaks to her family. I love you, my dad says. I love you, my mom says. And all I say back is I love you, because there isn't a fancy or better way of saying that. Here's my finger again, and I'm putting it on my knee. I'm finding out that Nancy is loving, and I'm basing that just on the image in this photo. Look how content she seems with her family, right? At peace and comfortable with them and happy. And the exchange of words, I love you, from dad and mom and Nancy, shows me that Nancy is very loving and her family is very loving towards her. Thanks, first graders, for rereading with me today and paying attention to what the characters in the story were saying and doing with other characters in the story, because it's really important to get to know your main character even better by paying attention to the relationships they share with other characters. Have a great Thursday.